As you are all starting to slowly trickle in, just want to say hello, sit tight for just a few minutes. I want to let the floodgates open, and we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. So if you need to grab something to eat, if you want some popcorn, or you're going to get a milkshake or protein drink, you go ahead. About 2 or 3 minutes. And again, for those of you that are just starting to come in, we're going to wait just a couple minutes and let everyone get in so everyone gets the same information and they don't miss stuff right off the beginning. So you can sit tight for another minute or two and then we'll get ready to roll. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got a fair number of people. Deeply appreciate all of your guys' time and attention. As those still start trickling in, we're going to go ahead and get started now. So if you took a small break, go ahead and come back. All right, welcome to the Learn the Olympic Lifts Strength Talk. I am Rodney Horn. I'm the Director of Education for Eleiko. Fantastic company and a fantastic position. I will not be joined with my cohort, Patrick Wormel, who's our Director of Tactical Training, or our Tactical Training Manager, I should say. He's just recently got back from a course for the Navy, teaching a aquatics course. We have an aquatics performance training course. He taught that and did a fantastic job. And he's preparing for another course up in Canada for Good Life, doing the tactical training course for them up there. So he's quite busy, and we're getting busy here at the education department. So that's why it'll just be me going solo, but we'll have fun anyway. So no worries. So just a few administrative items before we get started into the content. First, those of you that are on a computer, you're going to notice that there is a dashboard. You have a dashboard that has different functions. There's a questions tab That questions tab will be important because that's where you can ask questions. And I will strongly advise asking questions if you do. I'm going to leave little breaks in this presentation to answer a few questions. And then at the end, what I want to do is have time to where I can start detailing and answer some questions. So I'm going to try to go through this at a fairly good clip, not have too many tangents, but I will try to give as much information as possible. And then we'll get to business and try to get some questions at the end. Also, down on the tabs, you'll see that there's a handouts tab. If you click on that handouts tab, there are 2 downloads. So if you're able to download that, you'll want to take those because that'll be just some information about how you can get more information on Eleiko education, as well as where you can get some gear if you want some gear for weightlifting, etc., etc. So I urge you all to go to our webpage at eleiko.com/education. We have tons of free information there, old webinars and all kinds of stuff. So you can get a lot of information on that site. All right. So all that said, what I want to do is, now that we've welcomed everybody and you know who I am and we're ready to roll, you know what the topic's about, I want to start with a real quick poll because this helps me to know who you are and helps me to guide the information to make it a little bit more specific to you. So the first poll that I want to talk about, or I want to find out from you, is which of the following best represents who you are. So we have strength coach, personal trainer, athlete, fitness enthusiast, owner, operator, other. That gives me a great understanding of who I'm talking to and what the questions may or may not be. Thank you guys. I deeply appreciate you answering this because it makes a huge difference for me. Excellent. So it looks like we have about 35% strength coaches. We have about close to 20% athletes, close to 40% fitness enthusiasts, owners, operators, and the others. Those of you that are others, if you want to just type in the questions, just type in what you are, just out of curiosity, just so I have an idea if it's, are you a physical therapist? Are you some type of practitioner of any kind? Okay, physios. Thank you, Roman. I appreciate that. All right, awesome. I appreciate that. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to do, and then we'll get rolling, is last poll. I just want to find out, is this your first Eleiko strength talk? Yes or no? Beautiful. It's about 80-20. Yes, first time. So for those of you that are returning, welcome back. Thank you for your continued support. Those of you that's your first time, awesome to have you along for the ride. We do these, we're going to be trying to do these at least every month. So hopefully we'll see you again. So about 77-23. Super. Thank you guys so much. All right. That said, let's get into learn the Olympic lifts. So what we're going to do is discuss a few simple topics. I want to talk about quickly just some benefits. We're going to get into some simple screening processes or movements you can do to help screen either yourself or athletes that you're working with. We're going to talk about step-by-step guidance. We're going to kind of breeze through it and what you have the opportunity to do, and what one of those handouts is actually, we have an online weightlifting course. So if you're looking for some CECs or you want to get access to a course where there's an online course and you can have that information forever, that would be fantastic. We also do these courses live around the world. The Asia Pacific region is a huge region for us, as well as the US and other regions that are also able to do this live. You just have to check with them specifically or contact us if you want live courses. We will come to you, especially in the US, we'll come to you and do it, or you can come to us when we have these courses. So I just want you to know that we do these courses. So this is just a little snapshot of what we have in the bigger realm. But we're going to talk step by step through this, and we're going to throw out a little bit of programming. Not going to get super detailed because, again, what I want to do is get some information or questions from you to make this more specific to who you are and what you're looking for. All right. First and foremost, always need to define our terms. So when we talk about a snatch, what is a snatch? So a snatch is just lifting the bar from the ground to the floor. It's going to be all in one motion. So you can see that's the beginning and the ending. Well, that's not quite the ending motion because you're going to stand up, but that's where it is. And the snatch and clean, as we'll talk about, they're also considered a full or a squat version, which is you're going to catch it in a deep squat. So you'll notice, especially in competitions, if you ever watched the Olympics or you've seen competitions or you've competed, you know that usually it pulls from the floor, they'll catch it in a deep squat and then they'll lift up. The reason for the deep squat is so the bar doesn't have to move real high, because when you're using a heavy load, if you're doing a competition, the obvious purpose of competition is who can lift the heaviest weight. The heavier the weight, the less the load's going to move, the height, and you don't want to move it so much, you're going to move around the bar. And that's what weightlifting, and when I say weightlifting is actually Olympic lifting. So people use weightlifting as resistance training. It is a form of resistance training, but weightlifting is specifically the Olympic lifts. Weight training is just like strength training. So those are two different definitions. I just threw that one in there for you. So anyways, that's where we move this bar. This is a dance. We talk about Olympic lifting. We're talking about dancing with the bar. We have to get the bar into place so we can move around the bar to actually make the lift successful. Okay, so that's the snatch. Clean's the same thing, except we're just lifting it to basically the top of our chest, rested on the shoulders, upper chest, and that's all in one movement. Many components that we'll go through, but just one movement. A power snatch or power clean is catching the barbell. You start on the floor and you catch it in a quarter or half squat, depending on your range of motion, load, all those different things. So that's what a power snatch or power clean is. Starts from the floor, ends in a quarter or half squat instead of in a deep full squat. A hang snatch or clean, and by the way, we're just going to talk about the snatch and clean. I know in the original outline I talked about the jerk. I'm not going to do the jerk just to save time, because that's like another 15, 20 minutes, and I'd rather get to questions than just go through that. You can get on the course and see all that information. By the way, there's a 25% discount on the course if you sign up with the code that you provided with, and that lasts till the end of April. So hang, kind of what it sounds like, is you're starting in a hang position. And it can be hang from the knee, hang from mid-thigh, or hang from the hip, depending on if you're doing a snatch or a clean. So those are different hang positions. You're going to start from that, and then at true hang, clean, or snatch, I'm going to start from the hang position, and I'm going to end in a full squat. So power is you start from the floor, and you end in a quarter or half squat. Hang is you start from a hang position, knee or hip position, and you're going to end in a full squat. Hang power is what a lot of people do, and they'll call it power or they'll call it hanging, but the hang power is actually when you, excuse me, lift from the knee and you finish in a quarter squat or half squat. So there's a lot of terminology that's out there. Technically, it doesn't matter what you call it as long as you're performing it correctly, but just so you know, that's what these terms actually mean. Then there's the muscle variety. And the muscle is you're lifting the bar to the catch position without a pull under. So that's just where, depending on what lift you're doing, you're either coming up here in a standing position or you're bringing it up over your head. And that's kind of a good technique builder and just a way to get used to the actual motions. You'll see it later on at the end of the presentation, kind of a process that we use to teach this particular, or these particular lifts to make it much more simplistic as we move forward. Okay, so now that we've got here to this point, I want to ask one more poll. And what I want to know is, how often do you personally perform the Olympic lifts? Is it weekly, monthly, not much? Have never tried it. Beautiful, beautiful. So most of you are performing Olympic lifts fairly consistently. It's great to see that there's a few people who've never tried them. I love that you're on this, so thank you so much. We have about 30% of the people who don't do them very much or have never tried them, and about 60% who do them weekly. So great combination. Thank you guys so much. I love you answering polls. It really helps me out. Okay, so at Eleiko, as we go through, I'll start talking about how we train them, but essentially from a benefit standpoint, kind of a no-brainer. It's a strength training exercise. So we know there's so many benefits to strength training: strength, power, muscle mass. Obviously, there's a mental component, huge ability to enhance your ability to think, memory, all kinds of things, coordination, dynamic stability, and obviously the immune system strength. The immune system is huge. Your muscle tissue, just so you know, has a massive impact on immunity and overall body health. That's another webinar sometime. Okay, so obviously we also have weightlifting gear that you can use, and at Eleiko we produce a lot of weightlifting gear. So in the handout there's a whole section you can go there as well. There's specific stuff, but please realize that you don't need any of these things. It's not mandatory to have this. They can be very helpful and beneficial. For those of you that lift weekly, you may have some of this. If you don't and you may want some, go for it. Just know they exist. Okay, movement screens. We're going to keep it very simple. So obviously the movement screens are there to help us understand how the person moves, but that information leads us to what type of equipment maybe we want to use versus the barbell itself, what positions. So should I be starting someone in a full snatch or clean, or should I be doing hangs? Should I be doing power? Should I be doing hang power? How should I be using these Olympic lifts for the particular person I'm working with? Or if you're training yourself, how should I know what to do for me? We're going to talk about a hip hinge. And we will talk about, you can do them from both narrow and wide stance. That just gives you a little variance to see what your body's comfortable with. Body weight squats and overhead squats. So when we're doing these, and I'll go through those in a second. When we're doing these, what we're looking for very simplistically is, is the athlete that you're working with able to perform and control the movement to the appropriate range of motion that they're going to need to do the movement in either or both of those stances, grips. One may be way more comfortable. That's going to tell you this is where they're going to probably want to be. Some people are much more comfortable wide. Some people can go narrow and wide. It's not a big deal. So that means they have a little bit more variety in how they can perform the lift. And two, if they can't get to a certain position, what's the difference? We just kind of mentioned that. All right, from a hip hinge, real simple. If you have a dowel rod, most people, if you're learning to do the Olympic lifts and you've never done them, so in the courses that we teach, and if you do the online course, you'll see we always start everyone with a dowel rod, whether it's a PVC pipe or it's a wooden dowel rod, you can use a broomstick. Just to get something in your hand that gives you the ability to go through the motion before you start loading that motion. So the hip hinge, keeping the knees at about a 1/8 squat position. So essentially, you're just unlocking the knee, and then you're going to take that dowel rod with your back and head in a neutral position, just so you're not all hunched over and all rounded or not super arched. And you're just going to slide the dowel rod right down the thighs as far as you can get. Preferably what you want to do is you want to get to just below the knee where you see Patrick in this position right here. The reason why the hip hinge is so important is because the Olympic lifts, both the snatch and the clean, especially the full versions coming from the floor up, really comprise two primary movements. It's almost like a leg press or the initiation of a squat and then a hinge. So there's a leg press where you drive your knees into a more shrinking position. And then from that position where Patrick's at, when you get just above the knee, then it becomes a hip hinge. So if you can't hip hinge real well, you're not going to be able to get that the hips through. You're not going to be able to get into good triple extension. And depending on how well that person can get into this position may determine whether they should start from the floor or from more of a hang or a high hang position. Then the front squat. Didn't have a picture of a body weight front squat, so we're just using a front squat. But from a body weight front squat, you can also just use your hands. So you can just simply put your thumbs on your collarbone with your palms facing upward. And can you actually put your elbows in this position? And then can you actually squat down and maintain that position? So if you can't keep your elbows up here and then squat down and up and your elbows start to fall, That just means you're lacking a little bit of mobility, which mobility has a lot to do with the ability to activate muscles. It's not necessarily how much can you stretch them, because you can stretch them for weeks, but you can't control it. So there's a whole component to the mobility section in the shoulder girdle. This one obviously is going to be more specific to the clean, not necessarily the snatch, but obviously there's carryover. So all you're going to do is perform the squat. Ideally, what you'd like to see is being able to get into a just below parallel position. Typically, if you're going to do a full snatch or full clean, your squat position is going to be more of a deep, full to deep squat. So that's what you're looking for. And then the overhead squat, which is much more specific to the snatch. Hands are going to be above the head. No, you don't have to use weight or a bar. You can use a dowel rod. And the hands are going to be wider for the snatch, obviously. You can do this in a narrow grip to see what you're like with narrow feet, and you can go wider in a wide grip with wider feet just to see the difference between the two for you. And you're just going to perform a deep squat. Obviously, you want to try to get below parallel when you're doing that. So those are the 3 movement screens that will help you determine how well can I squat down. Because if someone can't get to parallel, below parallel in an overhead squat, then they're probably going to want to be doing more of the power snatch or power clean, where they're catching it in a quarter to half squat. That way you're not going beyond a point that they can control, which increases the risk of injury. Okay, any questions to this point? Any questions to this point? Real quick question was, do you rest the barbell on your chest or primarily in your hands? It should actually be on the shoulders and the top of the chest and the hands. If you're resting it in just the hands, you're going to be trying to support that bar, and that's going to be really hard when it's heavy weight because you have to be in this position. So ultimately, you should be able to get to where the elbows and the bar is resting on the upper shoulder chest area, right across through there. Good question. Thank you for asking that, Andres. Any other questions to this point? Okay, hook grip to start lift. Yes, so we'll talk about when we get to the grip. As we go through right now, we'll talk about grip. Hook grip is always something that can be done, but I'll talk more about that specifically because you don't have to do that, but we'll get in there. So thank you for that. Great question, Stephen, appreciate it. Any recommendations for increasing mobility to reach below your knees? I do have tons of recommendations for that, but I'm not going to get into that because of how detailed it is. But what that might do, just so you know, Nils, is you may have, we may be able to do a specific webinar on mobility related to the Olympic lifts, because mobility is a massively important but very misunderstood concept, which is now part of our readiness and recovery training course that we have, which will be launched this summer on an online version, but it is live. Just a good question. Does catching low mean the same as not being strong enough to move the weight? No. No, catching low means that you don't need to move the bar because you can get under the bar and you're strong enough to support it and stand back up. So if I understood your question correctly, Tevin, so thank you very much. All right, let's go on now. Here we go, snatch and clean. So first off, when the snatch is performed, a full snatch starts at the floor, you pull to the knee. That right there is more of a leg press motion. So you're not hinging yet, your back stays in the same position, you're just straightening the knees. Then from there, you're gonna go into that pull position. We missed the scoop, but we'll talk about that later. You're gonna go into the second pulls is what they call it. That first one is the first pull. This is starting the second pull where there's a shrug and a high pull. We'll detail that in a second. Then you go to a pull under where now you're dropping down. So you'll see that the bar gets to a certain height, and in that third picture, we don't have the high pull where the elbows come up, but with the elbows up, where that bar would end up is exactly where it stays when this particular person, one of our educators, Daniel, drops under that bar. So when we do a pull under, the bar doesn't move, you actually move around the bar. That's the beauty of Olympic lifting, is you're using that awesome law of physics, law of motion, that's called inertia, A body that is in motion will remain in motion until acted upon by another force. So that's the whole purpose for doing the triple extension and the pulls and doing the motions the way we do it in Olympic weightlifting, is to get the bar to start to move. And as it's still moving up, we drop under it. So you're tricking the system, but that's how it works. Okay, the clean, and then from there, you obviously have to stand up. That's a full snatch. The clean has the exact same movements to a point. So it's still the same first pull, getting it to the knee, then you're gonna scoop to the hip, and then you're gonna shrug high pull, and then you're gonna drop under. So they both have that pull under, where we get it to a position, we get the bar to a position. Where that will be dependent upon the load, what you're capable of, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going to pull yourself under that bar. In this one, the elbows are gonna swing through versus snapping up with the hands for the snatch. And then you stand. Okay, so there's the snatch and it's schematic of it. The reason I did pictures is because the movies are slow through the internet. Now, one of the things that we've done at Eleiko is we have systems for programming, we have systems for understanding what performance is. I am a huge believer in systems and defining terms and making sure that everyone knows what we're talking about. So we also have a coaching system, a coaching process that we use. This graphic right here is one of the most important graphics for a coach and or for yourself to help you understand how to manipulate an exercise as well as how to observe an exercise. So it's great for coaching and it's great for enhancing movement and then being able to manipulate the actual movement. So equipment, obviously we're showing barbell, but we can do snatches, we can do cleans with barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, landmines, all those different pieces of equipment. And some of them may be helpful or more beneficial for some people to train them to get into certain positions better to enhance the barbell snatch or clean. So some of that, just so you know, that you'll see in that handout, we have an exercise library with over 300 exercises. So we'll show you dumbbell, kettlebell, landmine versions of the snatch and clean as well. Then you go through positioning, and this is how we're going to go through this, the rest of this presentation. We're going to show the positioning, we're going to show the stance, the grip, and then the body bar relationship. And then we'll talk about the specific actions that we can do that make up each one of those lifts, the clean and the snatch. Okay? All right, that said, here we go. So the snatch, let's start with the feet. So we're looking at the stance component right now. We're gonna look at the feet and knees. So the feet, basically the same width or stance that you would use if you're gonna do a vertical jump. So if you're standing up right now, just vertical jump. You usually don't vertical jump with your feet real close and you don't have them super, super wide. So that's where you're gonna start, give or take. The toes may or may not be angled outward. That's gonna depend on what's comfortable for that person and what their position is. If they're gonna be a little wider, a slight angle may be beneficial. You don't have to angle your feet. You'll hear everyone say you have to angle. You do not have to angle your feet. I personally don't, because that doesn't feel comfortable to me. When I land in a couch, that's when my feet will widen and they'll go out slightly so I can track over my knees over my toes. So just know that there's variance. And then the foot should be active. And this is something that is huge. So if you've been training for a while and you haven't heard this, or you do this a lot, you haven't heard this, this is something that you're gonna wanna try, because your foot is a huge component of the stability, which creates strength through the system when you're training. So we call it, it can be called an eagle claw, it's a corkscrew, I call it grip and rip. So when you get that foot on the ground, when you're starting out, depending on, it doesn't matter what position you're starting with, from the floor, from the knee, or from the hip. If you take your big toe, your little toe, and your heel, and you want to make sure that you can kind of grip the ground. And then when you grip the ground with your big toe, little toe, and heel, then you want to pull the knees out. So it's almost like you're gripping and then you're ripping the knees out. And when you do that, you'll create an arch, which tells the brain that your body is stable because there's an arch and there's tension through the system. And that helps create stability through the lower extremity, but also like all the way through your trunk. I won't go into the details of how that works, but just know that that happens. So if you want to try that, you're standing, just put your big toe, little toe, and heel on the ground. Put a little tension. You don't have to try to put a hole in the ground. Just give it a little bit of grip, and then you're just going to corkscrew your knees outward. And if you were to squat without doing that and then squat with doing that, you'll notice a distinct difference. The center of pressure should be close to the middle of the foot. That way, the center of pressure is really a guide as to where your center of gravity is going to be located. So you don't want your center of gravity too far forward, you don't want it too far back, you want to be fairly balanced. That'll change slightly depending on body proportions, arm lengths, trunk lengths, leg lengths. So everyone will be slightly different, but in general, right in the middle of the foot is where you're going to have the most of the center of pressure. Get too far back, and you're going to be coming back. If you come back, the bar's going to go back, and it's a bad day. Knees, we just talked about pulling out as a result of the corkscrew, and when you're moving, they should be tracking over your toe. If the knees are way too far outside, pointed too far outside of the toes or too far in, that just creates torsion stress at the knee joint. Over time, that can be harmful. Okay, grip. So from the hands, obviously the snatch is going to be wide, clean is going to be a little bit closer, usually just outside the thighs. For the clean, it's usually about a thumb width outside your thighs, but that's going to vary depending on arm lengths, ratios between torso, arms, all that. And then a big one. This is one that if you're looking for why does the bar fly for me? One of the reasons why is people don't turn those knuckles to face down. It's like you're trying to punch the floor. Those knuckles should be down when you grab that bar, because if it's not, as you come up, you're already putting your hand in this position versus that position. We have to keep that bar close. The farther the bar moves away, the more exponentially it increases in the force placed upon us that we have to then overcome. And sometimes we can't do that, and we have a failed lift or we have an unsuccessful lift. Now, we talked about hook grip. We had the chance. Hook grip is where people put the thumb around the bar and put their hands over that. So it's this type of position. That can be extremely beneficial, but if you've never done weight training before, I highly caution you to start doing that, because it can be a little cumbersome on the thumbs. It can create a little bit of pain in the thumb, and that's not important when you're not lifting very heavy, and you don't need to start heavy. And matter of fact, you don't ever have to do it heavy unless you truly want to advance, either compete or you just love lifting heavy. Start these lifts in a light fashion and work technique. These are skill lifts. These are not just go out and jerk weight around. So I love the hook grip. I think it's fantastic, but you do not have to use it to still perform the lifts correct. Hope that made sense. The snatch. From a bar position, when you're standing, the bar will be, for most people, just slightly above your pubic bone when you're standing upright with your hands. So if you're looking for how wide do my hands go, if you're standing up, it'll be just above your pubic bone. Some people want it just slightly lower, but that can be a little bit too low depending on your arm length. But more importantly, when you bend at the hip, as you bend at the hip, if you're in a power position or that hip position, that bar should be right in the crease of your hip. So as you bring your hands out, that bar should be able to move to where it sits right in the crease, because that crease will be important as you go into the second pull, because it will actually help lift the bar as you move upward in the motion. Okay. So this is, and then from a clean standpoint, because your hands are closer, when you're in that position, the bar is going to be basically about mid-thigh. So it's going to be resting at the top of the thigh when you're standing. When you get into a hip position, it's going to be about mid-thigh. Starting positions. There are 3 primary starting positions. So at Eleiko, what we do is we teach the Olympic lifts from top down. The reason we teach it from top down is because it's easier. It's simpler. There's not as many variables that you have to work with to get up. If you learn it bottom up or you teach it bottom up, that's perfectly fine. But most people have a harder time starting from a floor position or getting into that deadlift type position than they do standing upright. So we eliminate any restrictions that could be happening, and then we have minimal motions that have to occur so we can learn the actions and then progress down and add more complexity. So it's a simple coaching tool and a rule that you go from simple to complex. Let people master something and then let them move on and gain more knowledge in understanding how to do that. So the hip position, as we already talked about, in a snatch, the bar is in the crease of the hip. The clean, it's in the upper or mid thigh area. Your shoulders are going to be just slightly over the bar. You don't want them too far because then you really have to pull it in. You want to be able to just have them slightly because you have to pull the bar into you. The bar has to constantly be pulled into you in order to maintain that vertical line and it doesn't sway away from you. So you can see the shoulders are just slightly over. They're engaged to keep the bar close. The feet are active. We already talked about that. And you have a good center of pressure over the midfoot. When you start at the knee, it's the same process. The bar is going to be just above the knees. Shoulders are going to be just slightly over the bar. And then you're going to have the shins almost vertical. To get from the knee to the hip position, that bar should basically slide up the thigh, which is where you scoop, which is why when the knuckles are down, you have the ability to scoop better. It's like digging in and scooping versus trying to scoop like with a flat shovel. It just doesn't work very well. And always feet active. Remember the feet being active. That's a huge component. Shin, now this is where we have the starting position. We're going from the floor. Bars about mid-shin. The shins are going to be kind of angled forward because you're in that squat position. So the knees are going to have to be moving forward. The hips are going to be above the knees and the shoulders are going to be above the hips. So you have that triangular aspect or that curvature that you see with the red line there. Again, the shoulders are engaged over the bar slightly. You can kind of have the weight distributed slightly towards the toes, not on the toes, but more towards the front of the arch. And again, knuckles down because you got to lift, keeping that bar straight. Okay, let's get to the actions. So those are the three starting positions. We start people at the hip. And when I say that, I mean, we will run through all these actions from the hip, boom, boom, boom. And then when they've mastered that, we get them to the knee. So we get them to learn to scoop to the knee, scoop to the, from knee to hip, and go through the actual actions. So learn from hip, learn from knee, and then take it to the floor. So the first action that you get to from the hip, and the reason they call this the hip position, the power position, because that's where all the power comes from. That's where you explode into triple extension. So it's a shrug. So the first movement is a shrug, and then the second movement is going to be a high pull. So we're going into hip extension, triple extension. So hip, knee, and ankle extension, shrugging, and then high pulling. So with a high pull is always elbows out because that's how we drop or pull ourselves under the bar. This also makes up what's called oftentimes the second pull. And this second pull is vital, like I said in the beginning, to get the bar to move so you can drop under it. If you do it right, it becomes effortless. It's just once the bar rests or stops, you have to have the strength to hold it in that position. Okay? From the snatch, the pull under now is going to be from that high pull, you're basically, the bar is kind of floating and you're dropping under, you're pulling yourself under, so you're actually forcing yourself to go into hip, knee, and ankle flexion. So you're driving into extension and then you're driving into flexion. And that's where a lot of people don't realize that you have to force yourself to go into flexion, not just fall. And then there's the catch. So once you catch in a snatch, the bar is going to be slightly behind the head, and that'll vary depending on someone's mobility, load, ratios, everything. Elbows are locked, and you're pulling the shoulder blades down and together. So you want to create a solid foundation with those shoulder blades, and that's extremely important because you want them to make sure they're here. That way, the base of the shoulder is stable, which allows the arms to be stable. And then you stand up from that position. And again, we just talked about it's important to pull yourself under. The action for the clean, the pull under is the same action of going into triple flexion, only now from the elbows out, the elbows are being thrown forward. So you're snapping the elbows from out to forward, and that's where you roll under. So it's basically coming up and you roll under as you're dropping. And then once you catch it, then you stand. And so the floor actions, when you're starting from floor to knees, that's the first pull. This is where you're creating acceleration, but it's not how fast you can lift it off the floor. If you've ever done weightlifting or been coached or you've heard, you want to get the bar moving. The idea is when a bar's sitting there, you have to overcome its dead weight inertia. So you want to get it to move. It's not how fast you can pull it up. You want to remove any slack that's in the bar and then lift and get the bar moving. The acceleration comes once you pass the knee. So the knees are going to extend, but the hip's going to stay the same. This is that leg press motion I was telling you about. All you're doing is pressing through the floor like you were doing a seated leg press, getting the knees to straighten, but they don't have to lock. Matter of fact, you don't really want them to lock. Then from there, once you get it to the knee, it's the transition. Now from the knees to the hip, now that becomes that scoop position. And that's when you're setting up the bar. This is where acceleration starts to take place. And that's where you're doing all the hip hinging. So leg press, hip hinge. And that gets the bar to start accelerating. So by the time you get to that hip, you now can explode and you're creating acceleration all the way up so you can get under the bar. Okay? By the way, this is a great lift that you can do, which is the clean and the snatch deadlift. So you can do these, which is slightly different than a regular deadlift. Okay, all that said, now here's the process that we do in our live course. Is we walk people through. So from the hip position, we'll go through what you see on the left side. Let's just talk about the snatch, which is the left side of the graphic. We'll start people at the hip and we'll teach them to shrug, shrug, shrug. And then now we'll go shrug, high pull, shrug, high pull. And then once they get that, then we go to muscle snatch, which is shrug, and then we bring it up. So we don't drop under, we just muscle it up. So they get used to this motion. And then we go into a power snatch, which the power snatch is now dropping under or going into a pull under in a quarter position or a half squat. And then we do the power snatch. And then we go into a squat, teach them that. And then we do the full snatch where they catch it in a full squat. So we just do that. You can do that from the knee, you can do that from the shin. As that shows, simple to complex. And that's a great learning tool if you're going to learn. Where a lot of people get lost is they try to do the full movement. I strongly urge you, for those of you who've not trained much with these or have never done them, learn to shrug from the hip, then from the knee to the hip. Learn to do those motions, shrug and high pull, because if you miss those motions, you miss creating the momentum of the bar necessary to complete the motion more precisely. So learn the components before you worry about mastering the overall lift. Okay? And then one of the questions we get asked all the time is, where can I put the lifts? How do I work that into a program? Especially if I'm not doing a weightlifting specific program, because a lot of people like to incorporate it into this. You can put them anywhere. You can use your warm up just to run through the technique with a dowel rod or a very light bar. You can just use that as part of your warm up. You can put it in depending on what type of programming scheme you use. Is it a skill component or is it a speed, agility, quickness component of your workout? Then you can do other things. You'll see that there are jerk movements in here we didn't talk about, but you can work on footwork. You can do the same thing with speed, agility, quickness, where we do pull-unders or drop downs. You can do drop downs and just get used to the speed of the motion, because now you're going a little bit faster than you would do in a warm-up. Obviously, your strength and power component, you can drop in various different things. Front squats, overhead squats, push jerks, push presses, all those things which are components of the lifts, even just doing muscle snatches or muscle cleans can be a good thing to do before you even worry about getting into the full clean or full jerk. There's so many lead-ins and so many things that you can do, movements that you can do to help build the foundation for doing the snatch and for doing a clean, where so many people start by trying to do the clean and trying to do the snatch, and they end up creating bad habits that they can't work themselves out of. So these are just examples. This, by the way, is all, this particular slide from here all the way down are examples that are in the handout that I gave you, one of the handouts that I gave you. So you'll have that for you to use. Okay, with that being said, that's the end of the presentation, and I'm glad I got through it to where I can answer some questions now, because I see that there's quite a few questions. So can you combine hypertrophy training and weightlifting? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can use weightlifting at the beginning of your training, depending on what's more important to you. So just remember that weight lifts, depending on what type of movement you're going to do, your weightlifting is usually more technical, unless you're just doing like a shrug. That's your power shrug, so to speak, whether it's a snatch grip or a clean grip, isn't super technical. But if you're going to be doing some hang power cleans or hang power snatches, I urge you to do those at the beginning of your workout, because they're going to require a little bit more skill, a little bit more neural complexity, whereas hypertrophy training won't require that. Hypertrophy training is much different. So yes, you can, and you just pick out what you're going to do. There'll be times that I'll do some snatch clean work, either and or combined, depending on what the day is. But then I'll go do, I'll follow that with some chest. I'll follow that with some arms, which is a little bit more hypertrophy oriented and or power oriented, meaning strength oriented, I should say. So yes, you can do that. That's a great question, by the way. Okay, and let me see, how wide of a grip is ideal for cleans and front squats? As wide as the ring? That's going to depend on, the great question, that's going to depend on you, your mobility, and what feels comfortable. So try. Most people don't want to be close, most people would be right. There are some people who get fairly wide. So around the ring, whether it's to the ring, or some people might be slightly past the ring, depending on the bar that you're using, could be fine. Great question. Should the bar rash the shin? That's a great question. And just remember, the more pressure you have the bar on the skin, the more friction you have. So we don't want tons of friction, but we want to keep the bar close. So it should brush the pants or the clothing that you're wearing. And sometimes you'll see it brush the shirt, but it shouldn't be scraping the skin. So will it happen? Yes, it will happen. Do you want it digging in? Not necessarily, but there will be brushing. So don't worry if it's not. If it's too deep, it just means you're creating too much friction and you're not getting the knees extended enough. You might be pulling and hinging more. If you're coming from the floor, you may be hinging more than you are doing more of a leg press where the hinge hasn't started yet, if that makes sense. Let me see. Is the shrug the same as far as power and height goes for both the snatch and clean? So the only difference is the width of the grip. If I answer that question, I'm assuming you're saying, is the power output the same with a wide versus a close grip? I don't know that question. I would say for most people, the closer grip may have a little bit of pull than the wider grip, just because the mechanical advantage is a little bit easier. Could you please elaborate on the exact position of the bar at the end of the clean in relation to the clavicles? It's basically sitting right on the clavicle upper chest. So some people will actually have a little bruising up here, but it's going to depend on the size of the upper chest and the size of the shoulder and the flexibility in the wrist, if that helps. I find it hard in a comfortable position to rest the bar on them. Yeah. So it depends on where you're at and making sure you're staying tall. If you're leaning forward at all, so making sure you're up here and you're having to work that position. The other thing is sometimes it happens is people, when they'll pull the bar to them and then it falls on the clavicle versus getting into a position and dropping down to where the bar rests on it, doesn't fall on it. So that's something that has to be seen versus just sitting. I hope that helped. But shouldn't you use a hook grip? Not using a hook grip will propel the ball more away from the body, don't you think? That's a great question. And no, I don't think that it will propel the bar away. What's going to actually propel the bar away more is the position of your wrist, is the position of the knuckles. If those knuckles aren't down, it doesn't matter if you're in a hook grip, you're going to still have the bar here. Your wrist controls the bar, not the thumb grip per se. It's the position of the knuckles. That's a great question and a great observation. Hook grip won't change. All hook grip does is take pressure off the forearm and the grip, so you don't have as much strength being utilized in the forearms to hold the bar. Okay, great question. Difference in starting feet position in relation to the barbell between clean and snatch, twin balls versus. So this is your foot positions. The biggest thing is foot positions are going to be relative to the person. So I know for me and a number of lifters that I've been around, there's a number of them that the position of a snatch and a clean can be almost identical. Some people may have to go slightly wider in a snatch just to get down, and that's typically due to hip mobility, not necessarily anything other than that, because the snatch with the hands wider means you got to get a little bit lower. Typically you're going to be slightly lower, but that's also dependent upon your arm length ratio to your legs and torso. So ratios will play into that. So yes, they can be, but it doesn't mean they have to be. So what we want to do is find what looks and feels best for us or for the athletes or client that we're working with, and not try to fit it into, you have to be in this position, because every body type is going to be slightly different. Great questions, you guys. An athlete needs to get faster under the bar. Which segment is typically what they need to work on to increase speed under to catch the bar? That's a great question too, and that goes back to the triple flexion that I talked about. A lot of people aren't used to working triple flexion. So getting them to work triple flexion, you can do that by just doing drop downs. You can also do that by doing box jumps where they have to get used to flexing the hips real good. You can also do it from a push-up position where you have them go like they're going to do a jump in a burpee, but you have them bring their feet through and see if they can get them up and get their body up into a position. So you start on the floor and jump up, bringing your legs forward. There's a few ways that you can work that flexion component, because you got to get people used to getting down. We always work triple extension, but we don't work triple flexion, and that's one of the key components in the weightlifting movements. Awesome questions, Isabella. During the snatch, when you're pulling the bar towards your pelvis, how would you avoid hitting your belt if you're wearing one? So a lot of lifters will shift the buckle in a certain way. They'll move the buckle up or down, depending on what works for them. But when you're moving up, it's also going to depend on the belt you use. So a lot of times you'll have to compensate around the belt, but if you have a real thick belt, that's probably not what you're going to want to use in weightlifting. Like a powerlifting belt, a lot of times can be really thick.
because they're not trying to get it up above the waist per se. So find out what belt you have using a fairly thin belt, because you don't need a massive thick belt, and that will help. Otherwise, what you're going to have to do is you're going to intentionally compensate by lifting the bar out, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's going to depend on what your purpose is. If you're trying to lift maximal weight, the farther you come out with that, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Okay. How to improve first pull, avoid moving around knees and move more through. I'm not totally sure. The best way to improve your first pull is to practice it, number one. But you want to make sure that you're straightening your knees and you're not hinging. Again, the biggest compensation in a first pull, and one of them, is people will hinge first. They're trying to pull their trunk up and not just lift the bar up by using their knees. So that's one of the most important things, because once you get it to the knee, now when you hinge, your knees will automatically go back into a bent position, which sets you up for a great vertical displacement or vertical jump position. Campaign code for Eleiko equipment. Don't have a code, sorry. Is the force applied to the bar in the pull under proportional to the speed of athlete getting under the bar and or vice versa? Is the force applied to the bar in a pull under proportional to the speed of the athlete getting under the bar? I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying, but you're not really applying a force to the bar. What you're doing is pulling yourself under. So you shouldn't be applying force to the bar. You shouldn't be trying to constantly lift it necessarily while you're going under, depending on what you're trying to do, depending on whether it's a power version or a hang version. I'm sorry, power version specifically, or if you're trying to do full squat. So that's going to change a lot of times the level that you're going to pull the bar to. But the speed isn't so much determined on how much you pull up, it's how fast can you get down. There technically could be, I could build an argument for why there would be, but I don't know. I've never seen research on that. I don't see any numbers on that. So that's a great question, Ludwig. Thank you. How much side imbalance in strength and mobility is acceptable? Hip shift. That's a good question. Technically none, but most people are going to have some, because they're not, most people don't do proper mobility to ensure that they have symmetrical motion side to side. And there is a way we teach that in our readiness and recovery training course at Eleiko. You have to understand what your movement capacity is, and then how to actually overcome that, and how can I change it almost instantly. So minimal, the less is best. That's the best way to answer that. When doing a snatch, where on the body should I turn and drop underneath the bar? So a snatch is going to depend on, again, are you going to be doing a power version, or are you going to be doing a full snatch? Because in the power version, the bar is going to come up higher because you're not going down as far. So you're going to have to get into this position. So usually a snatch, you'll see some of the great ones, it's just above the navel and when you for full, and then it might be towards the top of the rib cage when you're doing more of a power version. In your opinion, which structures in terms of mobility should we work more to be able to do the lifts with good technique? That's an awesome question, and a question everyone should ask. The structures that should be worked are the ones that need to be worked for you. And again, I go back to, this is why we need an actual mobility, a true understanding, which is why we built the readiness and recovery training course. Because people will focus, well, it's the ankle, well, it's the hip. But why is it the ankle and hip? What's causing that to happen? And so from a mobility standpoint, to keep it really simple, and unfortunately you're not going to get a specific answer, is it's going to depend on you. Some people it has to do with their core. Some people it has to do with external obliques, could be internal obliques. Some people it could be your transverse abdomen. Some people it could be shoulder motion. Some people it could be hip. It could be glute, it could be adductor. So unless you know what is actually not activating and not getting you into position, your ankle range of motion could be from a few things, not just because your calves are tight and you have to stretch it. That wouldn't, if that was the case, then no one would ever have tight calves because everyone just stretching at work, but it doesn't because there's another reason why. So I have to stop there because otherwise I'd go on for another hour. Okay, do you have a drill to increase quickness from shrug to squat catch under the bar? One of the easiest ones is go up into you're up on your toes, so you're in a full shrug position. And then from here, depending on what lift you're doing, you're dropping down. So we just call them drop downs. So from here, it's pull up and then up, pull and drop. So you're getting used to dropping down, and that's the position that you work on. That one works great. There's probably a ton of others, but start by just working on that one component to help. Make sure you can actually hold. Another one is, can you hold that balance position? Because a lot of people are unbalanced when they get up. If you can't hold that balance position up there, then when you go fast, you're off balance and it only exaggerates the imbalance. So get it up here or you drop down. Make sure you're able to hold those positions. You guys are awesome. In your experience or opinion, can anybody learn to snatch or clean? Yes. That's why Eleiko and we have built our snatch, I should say our weightlifting course the way we have. Because if you can stand and you have the ability to move, and if you can lift your arms above your head like this, then you can snatch. It may not be with 100 kilos, it may not be with 20 kilos, but you can perform the motion. And once you get the person to perform the motion, they can do it. So we've seen people, we take people in our courses who have never trained before, and when they leave, they're able to, at minimum, do a hang, power, clean, or snatch, provided they don't have any injury or restriction that's not allowing them to do that. Great question, Neil. Think you can be successful in weightlifting even when you are not such a big person? Yes, absolutely. It's not about size. Okay. So it's just a little after 10. I have a few questions. I will answer them. If you have to get off, I totally understand. Please feel free to scan the QR code, get the downloads. Before I let everyone go, I will answer more questions. I just want to have you guys answer one more poll. For our purposes, we just want to know on a scale of 1 to 3, how would you rate this webinar? 1 is poor, 2 is fair, 3 is good. That's all we ask, is just to have an understanding of where you guys are at, what you think and feel. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you guys very much. This was more of a general webinar, not getting specific in certain specific areas and things because of time frame. All right, fantastic. Thank you guys so much for doing that. I will try to answer a couple more questions. How would you best to train the descent under the bar? The descent under the bar is getting used to descending. So I know that there's a lot of people who have a lot of fancy things, but if you're not used to descending, if you're not used to getting down, sometimes it's not even about do you have a bar, it's do you know how to get down? Do you know how to get into triple flexion? So I'll say that again, I think it's the 3rd time, is getting into triple flexion is as important as getting into triple extension. So if we don't know how to do both, then it's going to be harder. And then it's applying that specific to the lift that you're doing. If I'm a complete beginner, should I start training with snatch or clean? Great question. It doesn't really matter. It's going to come down to, because some people find it easier to do this, some people find it easier to do that. So either one is going to be fine. you could flip a coin, because what you should be starting with is a broomstick or a dowel rod or a PVC pipe, about 2 meters in length, or about 6 feet long is all you need. Could be 5 meters, just under 2 meters. So it doesn't matter, because you're just going to go through the motions. So is this motion harder for you to do, or this motion harder for you to do? When you use a really light implement for a clean, a lot of times it's a little bit more difficult, because there's not weight to help push the hand down slightly. So it'll depend on you. Just play with them both, but it really won't matter what the weight that you would be using. Would you recommend to use a belt when practicing the lift? Not as much for stability, but more practice having a tight core. Again, it depends on how much you're lifting, but if you're starting light, you don't necessarily need it, and it could be a hindrance. But if you have a good belt and it's thin, and that makes you feel more secure, go for it, 100%, because it's going to be putting yourself in a position where you feel confident. So if that gives you confidence, then I say go for it. We do they asked about a tutorial video. We go through all of this in the online course. The online course goes through all of it step by step and shows you and has demonstration and everything in it. What does hump the bar mean when you're correcting our form? I don't use hump the bar, so I don't know if it means that it's like a brushing mechanism when you're trying to get the bar to come up, or you're keeping the bar close to you. So that would be, I don't use that particular cue. So if you hear that, I'm sure that has something to do with keeping the bar close to you, and or especially when you get to that power position, because that is the most crucial position to be able to get into, because that's where you explode from. Is there some technical model that you and Eleiko has been inspired by? I don't understand that question, technical model. So, sorry. In your opinion, do all athletes, regardless of sport, should learn these lifts? That's a good question. I think it comes back to, it certainly won't hurt them. The benefits are through the roof. The whole thing comes down to the coaching. What coaching are those athletes receiving, and are they performing the lifts correctly? Because they can have extreme benefits, and they don't need to do max lifting, max weights. You can get the benefits from working the speed of the lift, and you could be doing 2 or 3 reps with a 50-60% and still getting extreme benefit from that. So I would say, yeah, it'd be great. Does every athlete need to do that? Not necessarily. It's going to depend on what they have available, what their capabilities are. Obviously, it comes down to body structure, mobility, and all those different things as well. So, good answer. Do you coach? I have coached a lot of people, but I'm not a specific coach for competition personnel. What my expertise is getting people to do something that they haven't done or can't do. And so I haven't focused on coaching an athlete to try to get them to compete, but I coach people in the everyday person to be able to do these things that they can't do. So I've been with lots and lots of people, especially in facilities, whether they're a trainer or a coach, and teaching them how to do it and then how to teach other people to do it. Thank you for that question. The webinar is now over. Thank you. So with all that, there's just 2 more questions I think I'll answer. How important is sports specificity in your programming? Sports specificity is extremely in programming, but what you have to realize is when you're programming, you can do the sport creates the specificity of the weightlifting. So the research around weightlifting, which I didn't present, which I have a whole stack of, the research around doing Olympic weightlifting has shown that it actually increases change of direction, but you're never changing direction, you're only going up and down. The reason is because it increases the rate of force production, and it allows your body to neurally be able to excite and activate tissue. Doing movements will allow the body to transfer that adaptation into its specific form. So this is where practicing the sport, you don't have to train exactly like the sport if you're training the sport a lot, but you can train the benefits of getting the muscle tissue to do, or I should say the human body, to do and perform close to that from a metabolic standpoint, from a muscle strength and endurance standpoint. All of those components can be then transferred using the sport. So all of your lifts don't have to be exactly like the sport, if that makes sense. And that's been proven. This recording, just so you guys know, you'll get a message in about 24 hours. There'll be a link, and you'll have this webinar and a recording that you'll be able to see. That'll come out later. And then if you come back later, anytime you go to our website, eleiko.com/education, you can scroll down and you can see the webinars, and you can go back and look at previous webinars on a variety of different topics. I'm all done. Thank you guys. Those of you that stuck around, thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time and your effort. The next strength talk will be on the deadlift, and we're going to talk about that April 25th, and that'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern time, or 1 p.m. Eastern time in the US. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful day. Appreciate all of your effort. Awesome questions.